B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, May 3rd, 2018. And when I got the news last night that Rudy Giuliani had appeared on Sean Hannity's show on Fox, telling a whole new story about Trump's knowledge of the Stormy Daniels hush money payment, and in doing so, he launched a new narrative that may help Trump escape charges for campaign finance violations, but it proves that he and Michael Cohen, his lawyer, lied bigly. And this morning, Trump issued a series of tweets that are a little different in tone from his usual style. Probably they were written by a lawyer. And he confirmed what Giuliani said. Not only that Trump lied when he told reporters he didn't know about the hush payment to Stormy Daniels, that Michael Cohen had done that on his own, and Cohen's stout denials that Trump knew about it, and that Trump repaid Cohen for the $130,000 that was paid to Stormy Daniels. And I don't understand the strategery here. I've got to be really honest about that. And my first reaction was that Giuliani had gone rogue and that he was kind of channeling Anthony Scaramucci. Remember that clown? He served for, 9 or 10 days as Trump communication director before he was ejected from the White House? And they're both Italians, both from New York. I'm not trying to typecast people, but that was my first thought. So Trump is saying that after the election, he paid a retainer fee monthly to Michael Cohen of $35,000 a month to reimburse him for the $130,000 that he had handed over to Stephanie Clifford, a.k.a. Stormy Daniels. So let me quote from Trump's tweets. Mr. Cohen, an attorney, well, before I even read further, understand that last week, when Trump made his rambling half-hour phone call to Fox and Friends, he distanced himself from Michael Cohen, said that Michael had only done a teensy-weensy bit of legal work for him, and he basically put Swiss cheese-style holes in the claim that there was an attorney-client privilege between Trump and Cohen. And that issue about their legal relationship at the time of the Stormy Daniels case and subsequently does play into issues that we'll discuss in a moment. All right, back to quoting the tweets. Mr. Cohen, an attorney, received a monthly retainer, not from the campaign and having nothing to do with the campaign, from which he entered into, through reimbursement, a private contract between two parties known as a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA. These agreements are very common among celebrities and people of wealth. In this case, it is in full force and effect and will be used in arbitration for damages against Ms. Clifford. The agreement was used to stop the false and extortionist accusations made by her about an affair, despite already having signed a detailed letter admitting there was no affair. Prior to its violation by Ms. Clifford and her attorney, this was a private agreement. Money from the campaign or campaign contributions played no role in this transaction. And a footnote, the word roll is misspelled here. It's R-O-L-L, and the correct spelling would be roll when you're referring to someone's participation in something. Now, it's possible that spell check burned him there. It's happened to me, but it's easier to believe that Trump just doesn't know how to spell. Or maybe those little fingers of his have trouble dancing across the keyboard on his phone. At any rate, Trump is trying to do this remarkable dance, a straddle that cannot be sustained, where he's saying, never had an affair with Stormy Daniels. We paid her hush money to what? Well, the ordinary reaction of Trump to all the other women who surfaced with claims of sexual harassment, bad behavior, pussy-grabbing commentary, they were all threatened with libel suits. And instead, with Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, with Trump's knowledge at some point, we don't know exactly when he became aware, he paid her to keep quiet. And so this is unsustainable. The proof that Cohen and Trump have lied puts them both at risk. Cohen in particular, he stuck his neck out for the guy he said he'd take a bullet for, and now he's expendable. I mean, the term throwing him under a bus doesn't come close. This is this is making him stand in front of a freight train that's barreling through at 90 miles an hour. And so I don't know where this goes. Remember that Rudy Giuliani joined the president's legal team saying that he is going to wrap up this whole scandal within 2 weeks. And this only deepens it. It adds a whole new layer of complexity. And Giuliani is trying to spin it as well. This shows that Trump is not vulnerable to any campaign contribution violations. But lawyers say that's not really true. Because whether or not Cohen was reimbursed from funds not related to the campaign, his actions and the payment amount to an in-kind contribution to the campaign, and it furthered the interests of the campaign by preventing a bimbo eruption. That's Bill Clinton's term, by the way. And so I think that in order to get Trump out of one jam, they have put him into an even bigger pickle. And Giuliani is a guy who's been known as a loose cannon. But it appears that he and Trump secretly made this deal because Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Smoky Eyes, was not in the loop about this. She found out when she was watching Sean Hannity's show last night. Now, Giuliani is also roughing up James Comey. In interviews and in tweets, they've been trading insults. Comey tries to rise a little bit above it by not explicitly referring to Giuliani by name. But in his exchange with Sean Hannity last night, he referred to the FBI stormtroopers who had raided Michael Cohen's office and home and hotel room. So Comey responded indirectly. He said, "I know the New York FBI. There are no stormtroopers there, just a group of people devoted to the rule of law and the truth. Our country would be better off if our leaders tried to be like them, rather than comparing them to Nazis." Now, as you know, I'm not a fan of Comey. I am a longtime critic of the FBI, and I would say that Rudy Giuliani is not out of bounds to refer to some FBI agents and their tactics as stormtroopers. And James Comey and Bob Mueller presided over stormtrooper elements of the FBI empowered by the national security letters authorized by the Patriot Act that were widely abused and subjected their victims to gag orders. That's just one example of the way Mueller and Comey ran the FBI. And so when Trump and Giuliani and the allies attacked the Justice Department, attacked the FBI, it makes me really doubly angry because they're squandering the legitimate criticism of these agencies in service of their petty self-preservation agendas. But what do we expect from narcissists who are also compulsive liars? So Giuliani referred to Comey as a sensitive little baby. He should be sensitive because he's been caught lying over and over again. Now, Giuliani has no credibility. He is a serial liar, an opportunist who will say anything, and he's proven that over the years. Giuliani also called Comey a disgraceful liar, and get this, they should put him in the same jail cell as Martha Stewart. Now, what kind of bullshit is this? The Martha Stewart case, she never should have gone to jail. I believe she was guilty of insider trading, but they did that to make an example of her. It was purely arbitrary, and it was unfair. And so to compare Comey, and that he should be in the same jail cell as Martha Stewart, I mean, that's really insulting. It's juvenile. And it's Giuliani. Now, Rudy also went ballistic over claims. These are based on leaks to NBC News that when Trump called Michael Cohen after the raid on Cohen's offices and facilities, that call was wiretapped because Michael Cohen has been under surveillance for some period of time, at least since the beginning of April, when they made the warrant-based raid. And the anonymous source told NBC that at least one phone call between Cohen and the White House was intercepted. And Giuliani says, well, if they picked up the president, they would have had to notify him. But it's unclear of that because under the Supreme Court ruling from 1967, the FBI had stringent rules about the wiretap that was placed on Michael Cohen's phone, and it's actually a violation of law to disclose a wiretap. Now, I don't know if that applies in the case of the president, but it is a fuzzy area of the law from what I can tell. So here's another claim from Giuliani that really bears on whether or not Michael Cohen had an attorney-client privilege with Trump. And Trump has tried to distance himself, saying, he only did a little bit of work for me. And authorities have looked at this and said, well, he had three clients, Trump, Sean Hannity, and Elliot Broidy. And so to claim the expansive idea of attorney-client privilege is a stretch. Anyway, Giuliani told the Post, it's not appropriate. I mean, he's Cohen, a lawyer. You mean I call up my lawyer and the government is wiretapping him? That's pretty damn. I mean, they've already eviscerated the attorney-client privilege. This would make a mockery of it. No, you're making a mockery of all of this, and that's why Trump brought you onto his team. Trump continues his attack on his own Republican appointees running the Justice Department. In a tweet, he said the legal system is rigged. He amplified complaints from fellow Republicans that Rod Rosenstein isn't moving fast enough to turn over documents that they want. And so he is joining the fray against his own people. And he threatens occasionally, he did it again today in a tweet, at some point I will have no choice but to use the powers granted to the presidency and get involved. He's saying that he's been told that it's not right for him to run the FBI and the Justice Department, and that's correct. But he acts as if he can change that, and if he does, it, I think, will be at his own peril. So Rod Rosenstein is getting a spine, and he's been giving public statements about how the FBI, the Justice Department, will not be extorted. But at the same time, he coughed up the original agreement for the special counsel to Devin Nunes of the Intelligence Committee, and he's given up enough of the documents from the Mueller investigation that even Trey Gowdy, Mr. Benghazi, says that he thinks he's satisfied with what Rosenstein has done, and he offered a vote of confidence. Quote, I appreciate Rosenstein's willingness to work with the committees, and I have confidence in his leadership, Gowdy said, and Mueller should be given the time, independence, and resources to conduct a thorough investigation. I want to compliment The Nation because more than any other left-leaning publication, it has provided contrasting views about the Russiagate narrative. Stephen Cohen, the Columbia professor who's married to the publisher Katrina vanden Heuvel, has used The Nation to promote his skepticism of the Trump-Russia narrative, and Aaron Maté, who is a great young reporter. He joined me for a podcast in-depth interview a couple of months ago. You can find it at peterbcollins.com if you haven't listened to it yet. But he is a very careful reporter who has appropriate skepticism, and in his latest piece at The Nation, headlined, Don't Count on Russiagate to Bring Down Trump, he raises a number of the issues that I've talked about here, that the special counsel may end up writing a report that's very damaging about Trump, but it'll get shelved because Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein are unlikely to permit prosecution of their sitting president. And if the House remains under Republican control, it will take a miracle to get them to use the Mueller report to call for impeachment and actually hold the impeachment hearings in the House. So Maté takes on the Democratic National Committee's lawsuit, claiming, they're suing Russia and WikiLeaks and Trump, just about everybody they can think of to blame for the 2016 election loss. And he describes that the lawsuit is an outgrowth of the party's more than year-long focus on Russiagate above all else. Trump's critics have clung to the hope that Special Counsel Mueller will undo his presidency, leaving Democrats and pundits to focus less on White House policies than on its endless controversies and rotating cast of characters. The newly leaked questions from Mueller that he intends to pose to Trump offer the most detailed look. If Mueller has uncovered any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, he withholds it here. The vast majority of his questions are based on information that's already been made public. A possible exception is the question about any outreach by your campaign, including by Paul Manafort, to Russia about potential assistance to the campaign. And Mattei nails it correctly. The wording is vague. What does potential assistance mean? And does Russia mean the Kremlin or anybody in a nation of 150 million people? Mueller also asks about the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016, and he presents some conflicting information about the female Russian attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya. And she's reemerged in the news with the New York Times report that she had closer ties to the Kremlin than she let on. But it's pretty clear that her main focus was to unravel America's Magnitsky Act and the sanctions that it imposed. And that's part of a whole different scandal regarding this guy, Bill Browder, who I think has dubious credentials, and his story about Magnitsky doesn't hold up very well to close inspection. So Mattei argues that Veselnitskaya hired, or she actually worked with Fusion GPS because they were hired by a law firm called Prevazon Holdings, that's a Russian law firm, to do research on Bill Browder. And so Fusion GPS was apparently working both sides of the street. And either Veselnitskaya is telling the truth about her focus in the Trump Tower meeting. She actually offered dirt on Hillary Clinton from Russian archives. I don't believe that we've seen that it was related to emails. It's Carter Page who talked about the emails, not Veselnitskaya. So these are important distinctions that get lost. Another is that Michael Cohen is not being prosecuted by Mueller. That indictment came from Trump's appointed U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. He raises the issue about a claim by McClatchy News that they have proof that Michael Cohen was actually in Prague, even though he has stoutly denied that. I remain open to being persuaded, but proving that something did not happen is very difficult. Here's a quote from Mattei. The loose evidentiary standard has promoted ambiguous or benign statements and topics that would normally belong in tabloids to the level of front-page news. Case in point, the revived focus on the Steele dossier's outlandish claim that the Kremlin had blackmailed Trump over the P-tape. And with Comey fanning the flames, reporters have scrambled to uncover whether flight logs in Trump's time in Moscow allowed a window for the urination episode to take place. So he closes by saying Democratic leaders are counting on the controversies surrounding Trump to produce a different result. And if their lawsuit is any indication, such a hope would be misplaced. Now, I mentioned that The Nation provides different views on Russiagate, and a second that's available at their website today is by my old friend Bob Dreyfus. And I believe that this is a very weak piece by a great reporter. Bob, I'm disappointed because you take on Lincoln Chafee. He is a former senator from Rhode Island who served as a Republican, then became an independent when he ran for governor of Rhode Island and served there. And then when he ran for president in 2016, he ran as a Democrat. He didn't last very long because Bernie Sanders sucked up all of the oxygen of the non-Clinton candidates. There was a third, remember? He was the former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley. So Lincoln Chafee is threatening to run for his old Senate seat, which is now held by Democrat Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. And in this article, Bob Dreyfus used really flimsy evidence to try to paint a link between Lincoln Chafee who has had a post at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, on and off for many years, and he claims that because of that nexus, that people related to a Ukrainian group called the Foundation for Effective Governance, where Chafee once served on the board, that this links him to Paul Manafort, and therefore, when Chafee says that he doesn't support the current proposed legislation to try to protect Bob Mueller from being fired, and that he's a longtime skeptic of the Russiagate narrative, welcome to the club, Mr. Chafee, that this just shows that he's a stooge for Russia. Now, I encourage you to read this piece and analyze it critically yourself. But, as I say, I'm very disappointed that a great reporter like Bob Dreyfus would publish trash like this. Every day I stop for a second to thank the people who make this podcast possible with your subscriptions. Great folks like Andrew Harnack, George Reeves, Peter Hoffmeister, and here's Auntie Lundberg. They're all monthly supporters of this podcast, and I need you to join in too. If you're not a subscriber and you got a little extra cash, please come on over to peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, pull on it, click down on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month or our $50 annual subscription. More on the Trump-Russia stuff and the recent attacks on Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein. Caitlin Johnstone, the saucy Aussie, is published at Consortium News today, and she notes that media reporters, including Jim Scudo at CNN, are attacking Jill Stein. Here's a tweet. Jill Stein is on New Day right now, repeating Russian talking points on its interference in the 2016 election and on U.S. foreign policy. And what Stein was talking about is that the U.S. is hypocritical. We're all up in arms claiming that Russia hacked and manipulated the 2016 election, but we ignore our own role in interfering in elections in Russia and all across the world. And so Johnstone writes, rather personally, every single day without exception, I am accused multiple times of being a propagandist for the Kremlin. It is, to be perfectly honest, infuriating. These people are actively making the case for willful ignorance and stupidity. They're actively arguing that facts which don't support the narratives being promulgated by the CIA and State Department should be completely excluded from all discussion within the Western Hemisphere, and that only Russians should be making them. So check out her punchy commentary. I've got the link in the show file for the podcast at peterbcollins.com. The New York Times has a leak-based confirmation from U.S. and European officials that in January, Trump secretly ordered about a dozen Green Berets to come to the aid of his good friends in Saudi Arabia. That is the royal dictatorship that has executed more than 40 people for sometimes minor crimes this year alone. At any rate, we dispatched the Green Berets to the border of Saudi Arabia and Yemen in an effort to help the Saudis defend from the occasional ballistic missiles that have been coming from Yemen and at least crossing the border and landing in Saudi cities. Now, there was a claim that Saudi Arabia shot down one of those missiles, but that is widely dismissed. So, this is another expansion of the military footprint of the United States. It was not authorized by the Congress. There's no indication that they're actually fighting inside Yemen. But still, an active deployment that is said to be for training in Saudi Arabia, at minimum, deserves disclosure to key congressional leaders, and I think you ought to tell the American people too, but that's just me. Earlier this week, we talked about Netanyahu's deception-riddled PowerPoint presentation, using information up to 15 years old to claim that Iran has lied about its nuclear plans. We also know that Israel struck in Syria late on Sunday, killing 26 people. Then, during the PowerPoint presentation, we now know that the Knesset was deliberating legislation that is going into effect that dangerously loosens the war powers authority claimed by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, the language says that in the past he had to get his full cabinet to approve military action. And the new law defines the power and confers it on a smaller security cabinet. And in, quote, extreme circumstances which are not defined, it would allow the Prime Minister and Defense Minister alone to order such action. Now, look who Bibi's Defense Minister is today. He's one of the most extreme Zionist idiots in Israel, Avigdor Lieberman. And so, at a time when Netanyahu is facing a corruption investigation likely to lead to his indictment and trial, he is scrambling to get Trump to scuttle the Iran deal as he tries to move for early elections, which he hopes will give him a new term before the criminal trials begin. So just like Trump, Netanyahu is scheming in foreign policy in an effort to cover his exposed domestic flank. This is a very dangerous development. Meanwhile, the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas gave a rambling speech at a meeting of Palestinians where he was reciting his version of history, including that Jews of Europe brought persecution and the Holocaust upon themselves because of usury, banking, and their, quote, social function. He's also quoted as saying that Israel grew out of a European colonial project that had nothing to do with Jewish history or aspirations. And I believe that Abbas is entitled to his own version of history. I don't know that this is pure anti-Semitism, as many Israelis have quickly charged. But it's clear that his statements, as translated and reported, are not helpful to the Palestinian cause. Recently, I heard that former PBS and CBS news anchor Charlie Rose was planning to launch his own podcast with the people who've been, in his view, victims of the Me Too movement. I believe those plans will be delayed or shelved because CBS and the Washington Post are reporting that a review of 30 years brought forward an additional 27 women, 14 from CBS and 13 who worked at PBS or elsewhere, who said that Charlie Rose sexually harassed them. I'm still uncomfortable with this process where we're applying vigilante justice to people. Now, I don't defend Charlie Rose's alleged actions, but there was no due process, no effort to protect his rights as an accused man. And that plays out across many of these scandals. To date, I haven't commented on Speaker Paul Ryan's dismissal of the House chaplain. There's just been too much other important news. But the Reverend Patrick Conroy, a Jesuit priest, has announced that he is rescinding the resignation that he said he submitted under pressure in April. In a 2-page letter, the priest informed Ryan that he'd given in to pressure from the Speaker's staff when he agreed to resign, but he now believes he was pressured for lack of cause. Father Conroy said, "I've never been disciplined, reprimanded, nor have I ever heard a complaint about my ministry during my time as house chaplain." Well, this will lead to a struggle about something that is really not very important, but it's an interesting sideshow. Here in San Francisco, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has the reputation of being the most liberal and most often overturned at the Supreme Court. That has changed sharply as Bush packed the court with Republicans and Obama had very little luck in putting New Democrats or even somebody moderately liberal onto the Ninth Circuit. So consider that when you hear that there's an open revolt among these judges. 5 conservatives have accused the court majority of ignoring U.S. Supreme Court protections under the Citizens United decision. And the case involved a Montana law where there is a limit on political contributions. So one of the dissenting conservative judges, Sandra Ikuda, said donor contributions are a form of political speech that merit the respect the First Amendment requires. The Supreme Court has required evidence of actual or apparent quid pro quo corruption, trading money for votes, and that the liberal members of the court are trying to dilute that. Now, the majority, represented by Judge Raymond Fisher, stated that there was evidence in Montana of attempts to exchange campaign dollars for official legislative acts that justify contribution limits. He noted that 40 states and the federal government limit the amounts individuals can give to political candidates, restrictions the Supreme Court has left intact while striking down other campaign finance restrictions. This is teeing up the case for the Supreme Court to review. And finally, here in San Francisco, we lost a visionary funster as Gilbert Klein passed away in Mexico last weekend at the age of 71. I knew Gilbert a little bit. I met him at his fantastic venue in Haight-Ashbury called Rockin' Bowl. And this was in the early 1980s before MTV. There were a few music videos out. But he turned a bowling alley into a rock and roll nightclub where people actually bowled while they drank and partied. It was a great concept. I had some good times there. And Gilbert also was a radio talk show host on the world-famous K-Fat, where he did a show called Chewing the Fat with Gilbert for several years. And he also ran the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp before he retired to Mexico several years ago. Gilbert Klein, happy trails to you, my friend. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide, and you can find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.